Hey guys. All right. Why am I doing a talk on wisdom? I mean, to any of those that are listening that know me, they might find a certain amount of irony in seeing a video advertised by yours truly, entitled "Wisdom Part One," right? Because I would suggest that some people that know me would suggest that I'm perhaps in some respects unwise. But I suppose we can probably all say that, can't we, to some degree? There will be aspects of our family or social circle that consider things that we've done or said or decisions we've made to kind of go against the grain of expectation or requirement, in the minds of people who've developed a kind of position on things, or you're happy with a position on things, and see contraventions of these policies as sort of breaches of some kind of social contract. Whereas to the person being, sort of critiqued, if you like, their outlook might be completely different, and feel that their actions and decisions have been sort of forced upon them in a way by conditions that perhaps others can't really get a grip on. And that's, that's a standard problem for humanity. This idea that we cannot get on the inside of each other's sort of minds. We can't really truly sort of wear the shoes, so to speak, of another human, because there's so much that we can't sort of apprehend. Because I suppose in some way to say that you really truly understood another person is to say that you felt like them. So the feelings that they're having you might empathise with, and you might really internalise them to such an extent. I mean, a kind of strange example of this, which is, almost certainly biological, but we can all associate with that idea. When you're kids, or even a friend, or you're just someone you're close to, or even a total stranger actually, falls over and grazes their leg or their hands or something, or their hands go on gravel. I mean, my daughter Sophia was quite accident prone for a while, and it just seemed we couldn't get through an event without her kind of bumping herself or something like that. But anyway, there was this one particular occasion where she fell off this scooter going about 10 miles an hour down a hill or something, Centre Parks, and her hand was horribly grazed, right? And I can feel it now, and you get these blaney kind of, you almost feel this sort of pain in your body. So there's this kind of sort of physiological empathy that we have as a baseline for human beings. It's almost as though, particularly with your own children as well, because you spend so much time with them, there's a sort of tribal identity. It's like a little bit of the whole identity has been hurt, so it's strange, isn't it, this form of sort of physical empathy that you have. But then you get mental emotional empathy, right? So if you can kind of do that, and this is, I suppose, the definition of good counselling, isn't it? I think if you can do a really good job of that, then you really understand someone. I mean, living with someone, knowing them, knowing their foibles and habits and so on and so forth, right? Being able to kind of predict what they're going to do, and actually, given that, you can support the situation, right? So if you can predict, for example, that a certain phenomenon is going to cause them distress, you can prepare for that. Try and avoid that phenomenon in the first place, right? Try and manage it, try and dampen it, try and play it down, this kind of stuff, to try to support emotional well-being, right? And obviously this is all going on in reverse as well, and humans are actually very exceptionally good at doing this and building really, really strong bonds. I mean, look at teams, sports teams, right? There's this kind of, you spend that kind of time with people, sharing the same kind of goal, right? Excuse the pun, but the kind of spatial dynamic, sharing the type of communication, the kind of language, the symbology that's required to operate within that spatiotemporal, but sort of cultural space, so it might be football or badminton or something, right? I think doing that for a long period of time is again, it's speaking to that tribal, deep, purposive sort of connection, that meaning that we can share. So I think that's all really, really good, healthy stuff, and it's a shame that kind of tribal relationship can't be further extended and broadened and so on. But there might be this case for saying that humans have spent a hell of a long time in their career in these kind of smallish, nomadic 30 to 40 something groups. It's not that long since the agricultural revolution and the sort of permanent settlements and defensive structures and armies. It's not that long that we've been doing that. So it might still be that there's a kind of a limit. I mean, I've read somewhere. I mean, I was really interested in psychology a few years ago. I looked into, I studied counselling. I did Carl Rogers' person-centered counselling. It's kind of like part of the humanist tradition. I was very interested in CBT, cognitive behavioural. I've never received any therapy, although some have suggested I would probably benefit. Right? Although they said there might be this danger that because I sort of read into these areas fairly well, I'm very, very interested in psychology, that I might just be good at covering up issues or kind of representing them in such a way that makes it seem like that I'm sane or something like that. But I don't know. I've just never actually felt that need to go and see a counsellor. Some that know me might say, well, I waffle on quite a lot anyway, and I wear my feelings on my sleeve. Generally, everyone knows how I feel. I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but generally, I think it is. There's no point harbouring and suppressing and so on and so forth. I can go from tears to laughter in the same day, right? But anyway, so is this about wisdom? Right, it's probably not. But I've been banging on about philosophy and looking at the Greek translation of philosophy, which is love of wisdom. And so I thought, well, I've never really discussed the topic of wisdom specifically. I mean, it's probably come up, I suppose, in some way in the ethics talks and some areas of the metaphysics talk. Wisdom's kind of, I suppose, implicit in all aspects of philosophy because it's perhaps that thing or that desire for that thing that drives you on to analyse and study these sort of more specialised areas and so on. But what is wisdom? What is it, right? I mean, I'd say it's kind of a little bit, it's related to ethics in some sense because there's obviously this very strong subjective component. What's seen as wise for one person might be seen as unwise for another. So if this is where you have to take into consideration things like sort of political viewpoints. So, for example, a right-leaning sort of conservative thinker might suggest that unemployment and inequality is a good thing because it drives competition. I mean, in fact, I remember Maggie Thatcher saying that very same thing, right? She also, I think I remember one of her other utterances was, so there is no real society, there's only a collection of individuals. So again, kind of emphasising that competitive dog-eat-dog sort of, it's a jungle out there world where we're not a real community, I mean, I think that those, you might well be able to mould a generation into thinking like that, which he seemed to successfully do with yuppieism and all this nonsense, right? But she laid it down right there. She was honest, and I kind of admired that because I think some of the Tories and Conservatives since then have sort of been trying to play down the true, nature of their position and make it more palatable. Because obviously they've been playing on the kind of traditionalist narrative to try and win the hearts of the working classes. Also playing on the racist narrative very successfully as well. But they would think that inequality is a good thing, right? Whereas you take a socialist position, so they would say inequality is a wise thing to do. Whereas a socialist thinker or economist or philosopher would say no, inequality is unwise because it creates ill feeling in the citizenry, right? And jealousy, envy. And eventually it's one of those bubbles that just bursts as the level of inequality gets worse and worse. And actually some research by the WHO, I believe, showed with almost no shadow of a doubt that violence, increase in violence and crimes against property, sex crimes, they are very strongly correlated with fiscal inequality. Right? So you look at a place like America, I mean, they've got horrendous property and violence crimes, right? Murders all over the freaking place going. Well, obviously, I suppose the gun laws don't really help that much, but again, that could be a symptom of this underlying sort of neurosis, right? So yeah, here's just one single example of where the left will say one thing's wise and the right will say another. But is there some kind of wisdom that's broader than all of that and kind of transcends these polarised discussions? And transcends, and I tend to think that there is, right, and I would suggest that it is to do with a kind of alignment with the animal, right? So recognising that one is an animal, right? Now that's kind of, I bet you that's quite a hard pill to swallow for certain minds because for so long we've, what's the word? It's human exceptionalism, I think is the umbrella term for this, where we just automatically regard ourselves as superior to the animals, insects, mammals, and so on and so forth. And we point to things like the Sistine Chapel and say, well, they haven't done anything like that, right? So, yeah, just continuing on from there. So this notion of human exceptionalism and this kind of hierarchy of intelligence and wisdom, if you like, I mean, Homo sapiens, I think, means man the wise, right? So even in that very definition, or the, the word itself implicitly contains this sense in which we are kind of better than everything else. Now, we've got rocket ships, right? We've got helicopters and so on. So yeah, we've achieved more in terms of engineering these so-called inert materials, although we can revisit that question at some point. This notion that there might not be anything inert at all, right? But engineering is considered to be the practice of moulding sort of inert matter, dead matter, metals, stone, and so on and so forth, wood, into structures that perform some functional task, right? And now computational, and almost borderline cognitive tasks. Okay, but my point here is that this sense of there being a hierarchy. Even religion brings this. You've kind of got the super god, then you've got the angels, you've got the seraphim. Then you've got the cherubs, and then you've got the kind of mortals, that's ours, we get judged, and all this kind of stuff. And then, then you've got the kind of Noah's Ark kind of scenario where, it makes total sense to take male and female of every single species. And from there, we can repopulate the earth. Obviously, it's not to be taken literally, but it still seems to implicitly carry with it this sense of stewardship and superiority of humans over the rest of animals. So both, science and religion have done a bit of a bad job on our ego there, I think. So that's the first thing we need to remember. I think that there is wisdom contained in recognizing our true status, and our true status is that of an organism in some medium or other, and our kind of contingent facts and knowledge about all of this, position in space and so on and so forth, is based on some huge assumptions, and we've covered these in conversations with Donald Hoffman. And co, Mike Levin to an extent as well, this idea that actually we are dealing with a representation of the world out there. And I don't think that's something that can be denied now, because even materialist scientists like Anil Seth, strongly recommends listening to some of his ideas. If you're an idealist, then it's well worth listening to Anil Seth, because he offers up the opposite position. And obviously if you're a materialist, then, go and enjoy. Put your feet up and think, yeah, here's someone I can agree with from neuroscience, right? Because he agrees with the likes of Hoffman and Kastrup that we are dealing with a kind of controlled hallucination. That's what the world is for us. It's information passed across a boundary, a Markovian boundary, which I'm increasingly beginning to find the language around Markovian boundaries and so on, and the free energy principle, I'm increasingly beginning to find that useful when discussing these things, because it strips away all of the assumptions, right? So wisdom, I think, is recognizing sort of what science and philosophy can agree on, right? And those are the areas where I think we've made the greatest leaps. I think physics is a very amazing, wonderful, technologically fruitful area, of course, because quantum mechanics and quantum computing and so on are leading to amazing engineering advances, right? But it doesn't tell us anything about about the nature of reality. It sort of seems to be further away from being able to do that than it's ever been, with the problems with interpretations of quantum mechanics. And I don't think we need physics for our understanding of what the world is anymore. Yeah, we used to have this kind of reductionist notion that once we cracked physics, then it will trickle through chemistry, then biology, then psychology, and we'll be able to explain absolutely everything in terms of physics, right? I'm not buying that anymore, right? Because there's been so much talk about these sort of scale-free descriptions that, this is Robert Watson, Southampton University, actually, I can proudly say. Levin's talking about this, Friston's talking about this, Inez was talking about this, Mahou was talking about this, right? It's a kind of a meta-language for describing nature that can operate at all scales, right? I haven't fully understood it. You're probably beginning to detect, but my point is that it's not. I don't think that the game is about reductionism anymore. Okay. So anyway, that's something else to consider. So wisdom is recognizing the potential truth of some of this stuff and actually realizing that we're not these heroic figures that we once thought we were. We're man the hunted as opposed to man the hunter, right? That's why we're afraid. That's why we don't like the fringes, because that's where the wolves pick you off. We like to be in the middle, hence the normal distribution, all this kind of stuff. Most people are kind of, in that clump in the middle against whatever metric you care to place on there, right? And we don't know where that comes from, but it's there. I would suggest it's to do with being man the hunted, because fundamentally I think we're scared mammals, so we clump together in groups. Again, there could be this tribality sort of pushing this, and we seek support. I mean, you look at some of the larger groups like religion and so on. I wonder if the weight of that belief and commonality and similarity across ritual and so on, I wonder if that engenders some kind of deep sense of embroilment, or sort of being enveloped within this kind of network of belief and truth and so on. It must help with faith. I think that's what faith is a measure of that integration with that larger group. You get these sort of missionaries and people go on great journeys and stuff and visit temples of their own faith and so on, and it must just build up this kind of conceptual structure for them. And so, so maybe a crisis of faith is just a lack of cultural capital in that direction, or emotional energy, or I can't remember exactly how they describe that stuff. But it's so I think wisdom is understanding that the identity is fairly contingent, and much of its character is settled before even born, right? And then being able to kind of pull that sort of rubber mask off and say, well, actually I want to take these specks off or put them on, as is the case with They Live, which is a sort of cult, weird film, but it's one worth watching. It's where these, you put these shades on and you can see these aliens that are manipulating us and so on. And you take them off, everything looks normal, put them back on. All the billboards say things like marry and reproduce and obey and all this kind of stuff. It's a fantastic film. I think it's Carpenter. Is it John Carpenter? But anyway, it's well worth watching. I think there's wisdom in that, right? So I think there's wisdom in recognizing that, our personalities, our social roles and so on are largely constructed for us. Now, that doesn't mean that they're inauthentic. But I think for many people, including myself over the years, I've occupied roles inauthentically, I think. And that so I need to then come in and say, what do I mean by authentic? Because I think the pursuit of authenticity is wise. So I'm packaging that into this kind of definition of wisdom, which so far, what have we got? I say, so wisdom is the pursuit of knowledge about ourselves, right? In terms of our biology, in terms of our psychology, sociology, philosophy, physics, and all that jazz, right? And try and come up with a description that positions us within a broader foliation, because we know that we are within a broader foliation and we're profoundly interconnected. Now, the more we get to know about mycelial networks, interspecies cooperation, mutual aid, symbiotic relationships, things like the Portuguese man of war, which are multiple species, different DNA, but all cooperating, co-opting to form this kind of singular kind of goal-driven, Markovian boundary called the Portuguese man of war. I'm sort of suggesting that humans, to some degree, are like that Portuguese man of war. We're a bunch of other sub-agents cooperating together. I mean, we might have started off as, we're like worms. We've got this intestine on the inside. I wonder whether fundamentally we're from the worms. So we're just this digestive tube that kind of receives material at the front, takes some of it for use, minerals and so on, and deposits the rest out the back. And we still do that. We just happen to have a bunch of limbs and stuff to help us do that. But then you look at some of these early fish that transmuted into the early amphibians and started developing limbs because of all that endless shuffling on the shores. Either through a process of random mutation, but I suspect probably something more deeply guided than that. And I'm not saying God, I'm saying intelligent evolution, right? These guys started developing little limbs. So you start with these little worms, then they get fins, then they get limbs. And they just keep adapting, keep solving emerging problems and so on. And after millions of years of doing this, these entities have solved so many different types of problems. They're multi-adaptive, right? And that's the single That's our biggest advantage over everything else. It's not a single thing like claw or tooth or hoof. It's our adaptiveness. So I think wisdom is kind of accounting for all of that. Actually looking into a bit of anthropology, psychology, trying to get a grip on what we are, because that's what we've got from now until the day we die. So I think having some sort of grip on that, even the beginnings of it, or an interest, a willingness to engage with that, is part of wisdom. But anyway, so what about this authenticity thing? So, Sartre and the existentialists talked about this. I think Heidegger talked about this. And it's to do with kind of, again, it's about having a grip on who I am and what makes me tick, what delights me, what hurts me, and so on and so forth. And kind of, whilst being flexible and allowing new positions and perspectives to emerge and changes in one's character, it's also important to kind of say, well, okay, these are true aspects of me, right? And you've got to do stuff with those qualities. And so it might be a particular hobby or interest or profession or something that turns you on, that you've decided that you're not going to pursue because it's too risky, it doesn't pay enough, or you might look silly and get judged, and all this kind of stuff. And then after 10 years of that, the real horror for humanity is the counterfactual, isn't it? The what if, what might have been had I done this. If only I'd done that at this stage, then this, that, and the other would have come. And of course, it's all nonsensical because we can't ever prove what would have happened. But you know what? We can get a pretty good idea, and actually, fundamentally, that's one of our skills. It's like, what's going to happen if I do X, Y, or Z? And forming an assessment like chess, how many moves do you want to look ahead? What is it about the breadth of the search, considering a huge variety of different career paths, for example? Or is it about the depth of search? Is it about considering three and then seeing how far you can take them in terms of expertise and professionalism, right? So is it about keeping the door open or keeping the door shut? It's all of the above and more, isn't it? Right? It's saying, well, yeah, sure, Bruce. Bruce Lee says, be like water. Be able to occupy any space, right? But also sometimes you've got to be a little bit like ice. If you're in a position where your principles are under threat, okay, so going back to this idea of sort of virtue and ethics, I do tend to think these are important, and I tend to be about certain things I'm fairly absolute as well. In other areas, more relativistic. Again, I don't think you need a final dogmatic position on this stuff. It's what you are prepared to discuss, and it's what you're prepared to think about. That defines your interest, not your opinions, and prescribed positions on things. So anyway, wisdom. So I think authenticity is important. So it's kind of staying true to yourself to a degree, but without becoming dogmatic. So it's kind of a balancing act. So what else is there about wisdom? So yeah, I think that. This is where the hippie comes out, really, and I suppose that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this. So let's be authentic and honest about this. I just don't think violence is a good thing. And I think that communities can live in peace, and we largely do, right? But it's not just physical violence that I'm concerned about. It's mental, social violence. And I think that has to be, first of all, acknowledged as a thing. And so to give you an example of that, right? So I used to go and visit a good friend of mine in Portsmouth. And, he sort of lived on this estate. And I remember seeing little sort of babies, toddlers. This is years and years and years ago. I haven't been there for years, right? But I remember seeing toddlers crawling around on sort of tarmac, in the hot sun, and there's broken glass everywhere. And I'm like, do you know these kids? No, they're from around the corner somewhere. They crawl around here, And it was just, there was no parents anywhere near them. And then you see kids shuffling around in pyjamas or their underpants at 4 p.m. They don't look washed. And then you see some of these older kids from the estate, and you can see that they're on drugs already. It's sort of 11, 12, and all this kind of stuff. And you think those kids were just born into those families or estates and stuff, just arbitrarily. There was no. They didn't plan it. They didn't ask for that, right? Just as the kids who are being born with a silver spoon in their mouth on some country estate somewhere, crawling across grass and daisies rather than broken glass and concrete. They didn't earn that. They didn't sort of ask for that. They just landed there, right? And I think for me, so that there it is. There's a form of social, sort of cultural violence right there. So that baby grazing its knee and not being cared for, and potentially being fucking run over by a car, and that's a form of violence. That's social violence against that baby, I'd say. And so we have to recognise that. So we just need to sort of set the ideological arguments to one side for a moment, because otherwise they'll never shut up about them, right? And then the argument itself becomes the meaningful thing, and the policies and bureaucratic procedures and and it's like, well, hang on, where's the love? Where's the compassion? Where's the true social non-violence here? Because I'm still seeing social violence everywhere. There's homeless people on our streets all over the place in Cheltenham, and this place is minted, right? So it's probably an act of violence already, the fact that I'm aware of that and I don't invite them in. Yeah, you could come back and say, oh, they'll rob you. Well, are you sure? I got chatting to a guy the other day. I gave him a fiver. I just couldn't not do it, right? And he said, he held out his palm full of like cash. And he said, I've been saving this up, mate. And he looked scared and cold and everything. And he said, I've been saving this up, mate. People think it's for drugs. He said, it's not. It's I want to get myself in the shelter around the corner. So I want to prove to everyone that I can save up a chunk of cash and be responsible. And I've not seen him there since. So I hope he's got a place. I won't share his name because I haven't asked him. But if I see him, I'll check up on him and stuff. And I just, 90% of us just walk past, couldn't give a shit. Just assume that these. I mean, you hear this all the time. You think, oh yeah, half of these guys are just on the make. They make a living out of it. And sure, there might be one or two who do. And in fact, I'm aware of one or two who might. Right. I've actually worked in homelessness. I've worked for the St James shelter in Southampton. I did a few months there. Actually, I think it might have been a year or so I did there. Working in the kitchens, counselling the guys. I started a chess tournament, it went really well. It was really, really good fun because for some reason, homeless people always seem to know how to play chess. And so there's like 10 of us in this tournament, which I won. So I'm chuffed about that. But one or two of them said, oh, come on, Matt. Maybe let them win. I was like, you kidding me? They'd never respect me again if I did that. So anyway, that was fun. But my point is that we've forgotten what's important. Community recognises strangers, I think, and it takes them in, because that stranger might then wander off and then speak well of the people that have done that. It's in the community's interest to be kind to itself and each other, all the people within it, because that behaviour is then more likely to spread, isn't it? And people think, well, maybe I'll be nice. So I think that this is what wisdom is: understanding what you are, understanding that actually happiness and non-violence are preferable to misery and violence. Because what more than violence has the capacity to cause misery? And again, I'm talking about psychological violence here. And so someone that has to go into a 60-hour job and then do another 30-hour job that doesn't have any spare time because they don't have the skills to pay the bills, so they have to do this kind of work. Maybe they've got 2 kids that never see their mum because of this, right? That's violence, right? That's that's a human family being subjected to the machinery of some system that doesn't give a shit about them, right? And if we can't see that, and it doesn't. Again, it's not about ideology. Well, perhaps it is to a degree. If it really is the case that the Tories desire inequality, because as stated earlier, Thatcher declared that. Thatcherism is still a thing. Lord Snooty and co are still down with this stuff. But yeah, so that's wisdom for me. Let's see how this goes. I think that's half an hour now. Crikey. Anyway, have fun, people. Love you. Bye.